Welcome to Chapter 22, Charlie Munger's fourth rule. A stock must be undervalued. In this chapter, we have two objectives. The first is to understand how the earnings per share or the EPS is transformed into book value and dividend. And the second is how to calculate the intrinsic value of a stock based on the discounted cash flow model using the earnings per share. So let's get started. Here we are at the last rule of Charlie Munger, and this is one of the important rule, and that's determining whether a stock is undervalued or not. So in the previous chapter, we are looking at the three rules of Charlie Munger, and we were comparing Brookfield and Disney to understand the first rule, vigilant leadership, where we learned how a good leader manages the debt under control. We learned debt to equity ratio and the current ratio, and then we looked See's Candy Company and a manual transmission car company like General Motor. We gave an example, and to understand the second rule, which is a stock must have a long-term perspective. And then we compared Neo, a car manufacturing company, with Bank of America to understand the third rule, which is a stock must be stable and understandable. I rejected Neo car company to proceed further because rule number 1, debt to equity ratio was less than 0.5, but there was a sudden increase in the debt to equity ratio to $2.05 in year 2023, which I don't understand why, and also I don't know anything about the leadership team. And rule number 2, I am not sure whether this company Neo has a long-term perspective or not. I don't know actually. So in the rule number 3, not stable at all, because there was an inconsistent equity and negative earnings, and also the debt management was also like not consistent. And the fourth rule, price prediction is hard due to the instability of the rule number 3 and 2 and 1. When I look at Bank of America, the rule number 1, debt to equity ratio, which is greater than 0.5, even though the debt is a bit more, but since the company's leadership team is vigilant, and I understand the leader, Mr. Brian Moynihan, who is the CEO of the company, who has managed the company's debt very well, and he has a past history of a good leadership. So I know the leadership team. So I am okay with the rule number 1 here. The rule number 2, long-term prospects of Bank of America is promising to me because I have been using the Bank of America account for the past few years, and I have been visiting their branches. I think they will exist for another 50 to 70 years. I might be wrong here, but this is my guess. This is my personal guess. Rule number 3, a stable company with a consistent equity and a good earnings trend, a little bit of more debt, but still because of the vigilant leadership. So I would say this company is stable and understandable and predictable. Okay, so the rule number 3 is satisfied. So Charlie Munger's first 3 rules are satisfied as per my understanding, and so I decided to proceed further with this Bank of America company and wanted to find out the intrinsic value of the stock to make sure if the company's stock value is undervalued or not, which is rule number 4. Charlie Munger says intrinsic value can be defined as the sum of discounted value of the cash that can be taken out of the business during its remaining life. As the definition suggests, intrinsic value is an estimate rather than a precise figure, and is additionally an estimate that must be changed if interest rates move or forecasts of future cash flows are revised. Two people looking at the same set of facts will almost inevitably come up with at least slightly different intrinsic value figures. So in the next session, now let's calculate the intrinsic value of Bank of America. To start with, let's get the share price or the market price of the Bank of America on the Google. Then copy the latest earnings per share for 2023, that is $3.08, and paste it onto the earnings per share tab here. Next thing is copy the earnings per share values from 2016 to 2023 for Bank of America from the tradingview.com. It is always better to have 10-year data set, but in my case I'm using tradingview.com where they have given only 7 years only data set. So I'm just using whatever is available. But if you have more than that, like 10 years to 20 years, use that. Now, keep in mind, some people like to use free cash flow or the net income, and some people like to use earnings per share, which is what we are going to use in this example to calculate the intrinsic value of Bank of America stock. If you want to value the company in its entirety, then we can use the net income or the free cash flow, and then at the end you could divide that number by the shares outstanding to get a per share value. But for now we are going to use the earnings per share. Now we need to make some estimates on how the earnings per share will grow over the time. So one way we could do that is we can look at history, and I'm just going to grab all of these numbers, this earnings per share over the past 7 to 10 years or so. I'm going to paste that in here, and basically, so this is today, this is last year, and the year before, and the year before that. And if I drag this back, we can see that this is for the past 7 or 8 years. And if you want to see how the earnings per share has been growing over the years, we can do that like this. We can take $1.83 in 2017 and divided by $1.50 in 2016 minus 1, and then multiply by 100 to give in percentage. So between year 2016 and 2017, the earnings per share grew by 22%. Now, if I drag this out, we can see what the earnings per share growth rate per year has been. And then if you want to grab an average of that, we could do something like this and divide by the total number of years, which is 7. So average earnings per share growth rate over the past few years, we have got 22%, 43%, 5 minus 2, which is negative, and then 91%, then minus 11, and then minus 3%. I am going to use, instead of 16%, I'm going to use a conservative way, like 12%. So I'm going to put 12% here for my calculations. Okay, now let me add some more years here from 1 to 7 more years, and I'm going to drag this out, and the years from 1 to 7 years. Now you can see that if the earnings grow by 12%, it will be $3.45 earnings per share. If we drag this out to 7 years, we can see by the year 7 the earnings per share, they grew at, if they grow at 12%, will be $6.81. So at the end, we will be playing around with our estimates by changing these parameters here and see what happens to the final result. But for now, let's just say that in year 8 through 14, earnings per share continue to grow every year, but only by 6% each year, not by 12% like before. Now, this number is equal to T10 plus T10 multiplied by the growth rate, which is 6%. We are going to add dollar to the B and dollar to the 7. So dollar B and dollar 7 to lock in that number. Let's drag it out to couple more years to 14. So in year 14, if the earnings per share growth rate at, remains at 6%, in the year 14 and in 2037, the earnings per share will be $10.24. Now, let's say for the next 7 years, the earnings per share continues to grow, but this time now it's decreased because the company is becoming more and more mature. Let's say the earnings per share grows at 5% only. Again, this is not a final number. We are just playing around with all these numbers to come with a final estimate. So now let's drag these years from for another 7 years from 15 to 21. Now the value in this field is equal to AA10, that is $10.20 plus $10.20 multiplied by 5% interest rate now, which is B8, and let's lock it. Lock the field by dollar B and $8, and now I lock the field and then drag this all the way to the year 2024, which is $14.41. Now let's play around like we did for all the above three. Let's go to year 22 to year 77. In this time, we'll give negative 5%. So that means the company is decreasing in its earnings per share. So when you say 77 years, so that is the end of the life for the company. Let's assume like that. And now let's drag these years up to 77 years from year 22 to 77. Let's drag it all the way up to 77. And this time we are taking the negative 5% for calculating the earnings per share, which will be negative. So in this field, now we'll be entering this field equals to AH10, which is $14.41 plus that negative earnings, which is minus 5% multiplied by that number, which is 1441, and you lock the number by adding $B, $10, and then you drag it all the way to year 77th year. You see the earnings in decreasing order. On the 77th year, you see 81 cents. Now you remember Charlie Munger says that the intrinsic value is equal to the sum of the present value of all the cash you will generate from its lifetime of the company. So we are talking lifetime here. Now let's include a discount rate. So here is the game. The $6.81 earned 7 years from now is not equal to $6.81 earned today. So what we need to do is we need to find the present value of that $6.81. So to do that, we need to know what rate we are discounting it at. So the discount rate, there are different schools of thought, the different ideas of what discount rate should be used. Some people say it would be a rate of inflation, which would mean maybe using 3% or 4%. Other way of doing it is using the rate that you could achieve by just throwing your money into the index funds, completely passively, low cost index funds. So that's what we are going to do. For this example, I'm going to use 5% discount rate, and later we can change it to 9% and see how the intrinsic value changes. Now let's calculate the present value, which is equal to future value divided by 1 plus interest rate whole to the power of number of years. Now in this field now equal to T10 divided by 1 plus interest rate, that is $10. I'm locking it $B $10 so that I can lock it, and to the power of the number of year, which is 7. So actually let's put uh, the closing bracket here. So put the closing bracket to the power of T9, which is number 7 years. Now that came to $4.84. And you see that $6.81 earned from 7 years from now has a present value of $4.84. Now let me drag all the way back to the current year 0. Remember, this is today. The $3.08 today has a present value of $3.08. And then $3.45 next year is only worth present value of $3.29. Now let me drag all of this across all the way up to 77 years. Now you see how the present value has changed. 81 cents is only worth 2 cents. 95 cents is only 0.03 cents. You can see how the present value of those future cash flow has changed. Now let's go back to the beginning and do the sum of all the present values of those future cash flows from year 1 to year 77. Let's do that and hit enter, and come back here, and you will see the present value is now $148.47, which is nothing but the intrinsic value. Now let me play around with these numbers here. For the 1 to 7 year, I will put 10%, just be on the conservative side. And the discounted rate, right? Discounted rate, I will change it to, let's say, 9%, which is the index, return rate, and and 8 to 4 to 7%. And see, and I'm trying to play around with all these values and putting the conservative rates. When I put like 10%, and I see $64.94 of present value, or the intrinsic value. Now the share price of Bank of America, or the market price, is $33, and the intrinsic value we got based on the conservative approach is $64.94. What does it mean? It means you are paying $33 current market price for the share, but actually it's worth, or the fair value of the stock or the company is $64.94. That means you are getting in a bargain price, right? Charlie Munger says intrinsic value can be defined as the sum of discounted value of the cash that can be taken out of the business during its remaining life. As the definition suggests, intrinsic value is an estimate rather than a precise figure, and is additionally an estimate that must be changed if interest rates move or forecasts of future cash flows are revised. Two people looking at the same set of facts will almost inevitably come up with at least slightly different intrinsic value figures, because it is really dependent on the parameter values they enter here, which depends on their approach, either an aggressive or a conservative approach they take. But in the end, this is one way of estimating the fair value or intrinsic value of a stock or a company.